pleased today to be with Steve Moore, economist for the Heritage Foundation and former advisor for the Trump campaign. Steve, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
So before we get started, can you talk to us quickly about what your past is and what you're up to currently?
I'm an economist at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., which is one of the major conservative free market think tanks. I worked during 2016 for Donald Trump and his campaign to president. I was one of the senior economic advisors for the campaign. Prior to that, I worked for 10 years with the Wall Street Journal on the editorial board on economics. So I've had a lot of jobs in economics, and I'm very optimistic about the direction of the U.S. economy.
Gotcha. Let's just jump into talking about trade first. So you've said in the past that Trump is playing with fire when it comes to trade. So let's talk about NAFTA. Should Canadians be concerned?
NAFTA certainly is going to be, some parts of NAFTA will be renegotiated. But I think the biggest worry that somehow it was going to be ripped up and that we weren't going to have a free trade agreement in North America, I think those fears have been alleviated, because I think in large part NAFTA will continue to be the thing that unifies North America, and we're going to continue to have large volumes of trade between our three countries. I do think some of it has to be renegotiated. Those have to do with things like some of the labor standards in Mexico, some of the issues of intellectual property protection in the United States. And those are kind of micro issues. I think we're going to just see tweaks to NAFTA, not a major overhaul. It's a good thing, because NAFTA has been very good for Mexico, it's been very good for Canada, and it's been good for the United States. So I think Mexico has been the big winner, but that helps the United States because we want Mexico to be economically healthy, and they're our southern neighbor. We want to make sure they're politically and economically stable.
Right, but there's always talk from President Trump that he doesn't think it's fair for America. What are your thoughts on that economically?
We've benefited from trade with Mexico and certainly with Canada. I don't think too many Americans have a problem with trade with Canada. But we want to make sure that the highest standards are reached between all countries. And as I said earlier, one of the things we're increasingly worried about in the United States, and this doesn't just pertain to NAFTA, but all trade agreements, even with the Asian countries, is that what we produce more and more of in the United States is drugs, vaccines, computer software. That we want to make sure that the intellectual property is protected, and we think China and some of these Asian countries are not honoring our patents, and that's stealing. So something has to be done about that.
Right, and now that you've mentioned China, let's discuss the fact that there has been threats that we will cut off trade with China if they don't cooperate with the U.S. on basically making North Korea behaving more properly on an international scale. Do you think those are empty threats?
I hope not. The single greatest threat on the planet right now is North Korea.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a madman, a lunatic who has a nuclear weapon. It's a man who is a tyrant to his own people. He needs to be eliminated or removed from office. And this cannot stand. A lot of American liberals are saying, well, gee, we should just get used to the fact that North Korea has a nuclear weapon. Hell no, we've got to stop it. There's only one country that can stop it. It's China. China has enabled this to happen. If China wants to be a member of the civilized world and be trading with countries like the United States and Britain, they have to use every ounce of power that they have in authority over North Korea to disable that nuclear weapon system. And they have the capability of doing it, and I'm very much in favor of taking a very hard line with China and say, if you don't do this, your economy is going to be crippled because you're going to lose access to the United States market.
And they're America's biggest partner, $650 billion, exports and imports included. What is the impact if we do have to cut off trade ties with them?
Hopefully it's not going to get that far, but look, it's very simple. China needs the United States a lot more than the United States needs China. I mean, if China doesn't have access to our markets, they go into a depression. If we don't have access to their markets, it's going to hurt. It's going to mean prices of things are going to cost more. It means buying a tube of toothpaste might cost some more. But I think we got to be deadly serious. Look, this cannot stand. They now have nuclear weapons that can reach China, Japan, South Korea, Thailand.
And in July, the feds have said that they will scale back its $4.5 trillion balance sheet. Is that possible? Is that something that's going to be happening?
I hope it happens. I think it will. The question is how fast it'll happen. The Fed owns, those $4.5 trillion of assets, a good portion of those are mortgage-backed securities. We have to start selling those off. And the Fed should not be a commercial bank.
Well, who'd be the buyer of this
could buy
debt?
Anybody. Banks could buy them. investor groups could buy them, hedge funds could buy them. So, it's just not healthy for the United States government to be intervening in the housing market the way it has by buying up all these. And also, let's find out what they're really worth, because a lot of these are, mortgage-backed securities on mortgages that were defaulted on, 7 or 8 years ago. So it would, they're carried on the books at $4.5 trillion value. But the real value is what they can sell for, and we'll find out.
Right. Now, overall, what grade would you give the president on an economic standpoint for the past year?
On his economic policies, I give him a B+, B as in boy.
Why so?
Because the economy has picked up big time under Trump. I mean, we're now growing at 3 to 3.5%, up from 1.5% under Obama. I do think we can get on a sustained level of 3.5% growth, and that means when you have that much increase in output, it means businesses are going to need more workers. They're going to have to pay workers more to keep the workers that they have. The biggest problem the United States has had with our economy the last 10 years is we've seen, big corporate profits have increased, but wages have been flat.
Yeah, the middle class has been completely blurred.
Yeah, it's been flat. So if you get a bigger, faster growing economy and wages and income start to go up, then the middle class starts to, you see upward mobility, and that's what we want in the United States. And by the way, that'll benefit the poor a lot too, because as the job situation improves, you get a lot of people who are on the sidelines moving into the labor market, and that'll improve growth too. That's going to solve a lot of problems that we have, our debt, our deficits, poverty problems, paying for education and infrastructure. So we need a much faster rate of economic growth. And Trump has gotten there in some aspects by deregulating, by pulling back on the regulations on our energy industry, on our financial services industry, on our transportation industry, securities industries, banks. That's liberating, and it's really causing a big increase in volume of output by a lot of major American companies. So I'm pretty bullish right now on U.S. stocks. I think the U.S. has a lot of upside right now, and there's a lot of room. Even though we've had a good stock market for 7 years, I still think there's a lot of room for, a Dow 25,000.
Great. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you for having me. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you.